I'm Jen Giuliano. I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Research for the School of Policy Planning and Development. And my job here today is to sort of be the moderator and timekeeper for our event this afternoon. This is for us a very important event. It's a real celebration because essentially we are relaunching the Center for Sustainable Cities. And with that relaunch comes a brand new board of advisors and a brand new program of activities. We are very pleased that Dean Jack Knott is here to give a welcome, and I want to call Jack to the podium. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. On behalf of the USC School of Policy, Planning and Development, welcome you to this forum, which we hope becomes an annual event. I'm really pleased to see so many of you joining us this afternoon to really address these complex issues and challenges having to do with climate change. I really like this venue. It's kind of like being in a wine bar. We don't have any wine at the table. That's the only trouble with it. It creates a little bit of frustration, but it's a nice venue. We were going to have a reception outside, but apparently it's a little risk of sprinkles, so we're going to do it inside. Before I begin, I'd like to recognize a few individuals, and I want to start with Dr. Hilda Blanco, who is the interim director of our Center for Sustainable Cities. I want to thank her for her leadership in organizing this event, and I'd also like to thank our keynote speaker, Mary Nichols, who has just in a very timely manner arrived, who is the chairman of the California Air Resources Board, and I appreciate both of them taking the time to be with us. Could you give them a warm welcome? I'd also like to welcome our center's new advisory board, many of whom are here in attendance today, and I'd like to read their names. And then if you're here, would you please stand up and then we'll recognize them as a group. Monica Gilchrist, who's the interim California director, ICLEI, the Local Governments for Sustainability. Gail Goldberg, executive director, Urban Land Institute for Los Angeles. Gail, nice to see you again. I've seen you twice this week. This is terrific. Sven Hackman, the vice president of U.S. Cities Initiative, the Siemens Corporation. Con Howe, managing director, CityView Los Angeles Fund. There's Cal, you got to stand up.
Oh, okay.
Suja Lowenthal, City of Long Beach vice mayor and council member. Mark Musgrave, global communications director for Cisco. Jan Perry, Los Angeles City councilwoman. Carolyn Ramsey, Los Angeles program director, the Trust for Public Land. And Jean Rodriguez, the Director of Energy Efficiency and Solar, Southern California Edison. So please give a round of applause for our new advisory group. So we're very excited to partner with each one of you on our advisory board, and thank you very much for your commitment to our center and to its work. Now, the Center for Sustainable Cities is one of the newest centers of our school's 11 research centers and institutes. It moved to the school in 2009, and since then we have made the center and its relaunching a really top priority for the school. We're in the process of building a very robust research portfolio, and we are also seeking support through gifts and other means for the core operating support for the center, as well as sponsored research funding. And this center is very important to our school because it reaches really every facet of what we do as a school at USC. It touches on real estate and urban development, land use and planning, public policy, transportation, housing, and governance. And those are the kinds of things we do as a school, and so this center is really a centerpiece of the school. Now, this afternoon's forum focuses on a key area of sustainability, global climate change. Indeed, climate change is perhaps today's single most important issue that we face as a global society. I was in a faculty meeting a few weeks ago, and somebody asked the question, who has the biggest global footprint, or the biggest carbon footprint in the school? And I thought, how are we going to know that? Somebody's driving an SUV, somebody has 4 cars. Turns out it was me. Why? Because as dean, I fly all over the place to meet alumni and donors and friends of the school, conferences, et cetera. And airplane travel has a huge carbon impact, and it's true. So as dean, I'm the biggest problem in terms of this conference. So it comes home when you think about it in that way. And I also want to mention that this is a day to look at this for our school. This morning we did a forum on California's energy future. And one of the speakers was Nate Lewis, and he talked about the acidity of the oceans, the melting of the ice caps, the rise of sea level, the growth in CO2 in the air, weather, and so on. And it's just a remarkable things that are happening. The melting of the ice caps, this kind of melting hasn't occurred for over 40,000 years. This is not something that's a cycle every 10 years or 20 or even in our lifetime. So very unique changes occurring that we don't understand fully, and we don't know where they are leading us as a global society. So I'm very pleased that this event is taking place and that we get to promote a dialogue and look at innovative solutions for global climate change. In closing, I want to note that this forum on global climate change is a yearly event, an annual event, and we look forward to developing and engaging with you as a kind of consistent core audience as we move forward. So thank you very much for your participation, and I really hope that you find today's discussion insightful and thought-provoking. Thank you.
I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Mary Nichols, who we've known for a long time, right, Mary? Yes. I'm going to just read a little bit. As you know, she is, as I would call her, the chairperson of the California Air Resources Board, appointed by Governor Jerry Brown. You are probably aware that the ARB is very active and has done an amazing amount of work in the past couple of years. I think a lot of people are really pleased that Mary decided to re-up for another session. So she's been at this for quite some time, since 2007. But in addition to that, Mary has a very long career in environmental policy one way or another. I met her when she was here in Los Angeles as part of the Natural Resources Defense Council. She's also been involved with the EPA and was California's Secretary for Natural Resources, from 1999 to 2003. Please join me in welcoming Mary Nichols.
Thank you for inviting me, and I apologize in advance. My voice is even lower and sultrier than normal because I have a bad cold. But I did want to come down here, and I feel particularly pleased to be coming directly from the other event that I decided I could do today, which was the opening of the CODA electric vehicle facility, which is on Fairfax and Washington Boulevard right here in Los Angeles. This company, which is the third electric vehicle manufacturer to open up, they do EVs only, and the cars that they manufacture are not hybrids or advanced hybrids. These are 100% electric vehicles. The company has been working at this for quite a long time. Their sort of strategic niche is that they're really in the energy business, and they have developed a battery pack for their cars, which is smaller and lighter than those in most electric vehicles, so that they are claiming, and I have no evidence on this one way or the other at this point, but they are claiming a 150-mile range between charges for this car, and it's a substantial car. I mean, it doesn't look like a toy. It doesn't look like a cute little thing. It is a real-looking car. And I had an interesting conversation with the CEO of the company after the governor left and all the elected officials had made their remarks and had their little ride and drives, to the effect that in thinking about how they are going to sustain themselves as a company, because obviously that's their primary mission, is to, not just build cars, but to sell them. They're looking at very carefully at what they think their market is. And I think the most interesting thing about their way that they're approaching this is that they are not thinking about early adopters and the sort of Ed Begleys of the world and how to make the Ed Begleys happy. Not that those people won't, drive these cars and have comments about them. They're really focusing on mass marketing and who is the mass market for electric vehicles. And they're finding that younger buyers of all kinds are very interested in these cars because of their functionality, as well as their environmental attributes and feeling good about their role in the planet. But they have succeeded, I think, in crossing that threshold between being just an eco car and being a car, which is also environmentally very attractive, which I may say makes me enormously happy, because this is something we at the Air Resources Board have been working on for quite a number of years now, and it's great to see that it's finally happening. One of the benefits of coming here to a forum on sustainable cities is that I don't think I have to explain to you about what the Sustainable Communities Strategy Act of 2008, otherwise known as SB 375, is. Is there anybody in the room who'd like me to explain SB 375? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, good. So what I want to do is to try to talk today about what we're doing to try to support cities in achieving the goals of SB 375, and also talk about what role those of you in the universities can play in this new approach to designing your cities as well. First of all, I need to say that this whole issue of how to make our cities more livable, less of a burden on the environment, has been with us for many, many years. Some of us have developed gray hair while working on it. Others have managed to avoid the gray hair, but have still been at it for a long time. And one of the things we've tried to do over the years is to find ways to show people why sprawl is bad and why having a more compact urban development form would be better for the economy, better for the environment, better for investments in transportation, etc. In other words, this stuff is, if it's so obvious that this is good, why isn't it happening? Why hasn't it already been done by now? Well, I think one of the reasons is that there wasn't an overarching metric to help people see how they were doing in trying to get towards a goal. And while I don't think SB 375 is the only thing by any means that is pushing in this direction, it happens to have come along at a very, very helpful time, because it allows us to give cities something that they always are asking for, which is benchmarks and opportunities to compare and contrast and to compete against each other for the kind of development that they already want. Now, SB 375 is focused, of course, on climate change and reducing greenhouse gases. And the metric that we use, although there was controversy about this and some in the transportation community were hoping that we could come up with another answer, but we really don't have a better way to look at this issue than looking at vehicle miles traveled, because those are directly related to the amount of greenhouse gases that are produced. So the law requires the Air Resources Board to set greenhouse gas reduction targets for each one of the state's 18 metropolitan planning organizations for the years 2020 and 2035. In between that time, the cities can live with whatever plans they've adopted, but the endpoints they're to be planning for are 2020 and then 2035. And as I think you all know, MPOs are the federally designated associations of local governments that prepare long-range transportation plans and coordinate the federal highway and transit spending in urban areas. So the board adopted our targets last September. For the state's largest MPO, the South Coast Association of Governments, The reductions that they are now on track to try to meet are 8% for 2020 and 13% over 2035, by 2035. SB 375 says that the way they're to do this is to develop a sustainable community strategy, which is a blueprint of various policies and measures for achieving these targets. And they're working on those strategies right now. The law encourages, but does not require, cities and counties to approve their region's sustainability plan and incorporate the strategies in their day-to-day land use decisions. I had an opportunity yesterday to get a briefing from Hassan Ikrata, the head of SCAG, about how they're doing with their plan and the process that they're in. And I think it's really fair to say that while SB 375 and the SCAG plan has not yet changed the world, it definitely is changing the conversation that's taking place among cities and within the MPO, and how they are able to talk about some of these issues of sustainability. In particular, I would say some of the terms that have arisen as a result of this new kind of planning, whether it's complete streets or active transportation or walkability, putting pedestrians and bicyclists on the same plane as automobiles. This is really something, it may not be new to the people in this room who are progressives and advocates, but I think it's pretty new for the mainstream planning community in a lot of departments. These and other key terms in holistic planning connote the public benefits that SB 375 promises to deliver beyond just the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Compact development, for example, translates to more undeveloped land left for wildlife or for growing food locally and for filtering out pollutants in stormwater runoff. The State Sustainable Communities Law also has diversified the range of participants in regional planning, thanks to an unlikely coalition of supporters that lobbied for its passage. Advocates for SB 375 included the Natural Resources Defense Council, California Rural Legal Assistance, the American Lung Association, the California Building Industry Association, and the League of California Cities. They did actually manage to all hold hands and agree that this was a bill that should be passed. This diversity of supporters was clearly necessary for the law to actually take effect, and now many of these interest groups are busily engaged in its implementation, sometimes in ways that other stakeholders don't think is helpful, but at least they are all at the table. So here we are in the midst of very hard economic times when most jurisdictions are eager for any kind of development that they could get, and we have developers, planners, and environmentalists not whining, but working together to reduce greenhouse gases by addressing the topic of vehicle miles traveled. The target setting process itself was a remarkable exercise in democracy. Over the past 2 years, SCAG, which covers nearly half the state's population, has held workshops and community forums in each of the region's 191 cities, each of the 6 county boards of supervisors chambers, and each of the 6 county transportation commission hearing rooms. This rivals the kind of effort that ARB went through in adopting our scoping plan under AB 32. The exchange of planning data and modeling tools and planning strategies between the MPOs has been no less vigorous in enabling them to draft their sustainable community strategies instead of ignoring each other or putting each other down, which has sometimes happened in the past. I've seen a really amazing coalescence of the directors of the and many board members of the MPOs trying to learn from each other and develop best practices to do these sustainability plans. The San Diego region is the first to complete its plan because they started on the idea of a sustainability plan before SB 375 passed, and their board approved it just last week. We will be reviewing the plan to ensure that it will get the region to the 2020 reduction target, and we're now going through the process of doing that. We, of course, had a lot of interaction before the plan was adopted, and so we know what some of the problems are that have been surfaced about the way the plan was put together and about the concerns that many people have that the plan does not go far enough in pushing investments in the direction of transit and transit-friendly communities. The San Diego regional planners have made corrections in a cooperative spirit, however, with increasing transparency and modeling and a broader range of alternative growth scenarios, which is what we most really wanted them to engage in, was not to do the usual, this is the plan we've got, therefore it's the plan, therefore nothing can be changed, but to actually examine the assumptions and see what sets of strategies could be looked at to develop different scenarios. The Air Resources Board itself is moving forward in engaging California communities in the mission of reducing our impact on climate and our dependence on oil. But the local and regional planning organizations are in the driver's seat when it comes to the sustainability plans. They look to us, however, for information and ideas about what can be done with goods movement, what can be done with location of regional distribution centers, what we can do to push for greater usage of zero-emission vehicles and nodes for vehicle sharing, all the things that many cities are doing anyway, but now this gives them a greater impetus to work on some of these things and to make their strategies successful. A few months ago, the Air Resources Board awarded SCAG $475,000 to draft plans for 3 demonstration projects that will help cities visualize what sustainability might look at in their communities. One of these projects would illustrate how you can make living near a freeway more livable. We got the creative juices of SCAG planners and engines to transform a strip of commercial and industrial development along the I-5 in the city of La Mirada into a mixed commercial and residential neighborhood enhanced with green building codes and better access to MetroLink. And this is within the context of meeting the Air Resources Board's guidelines for placement of housing adjacent to roadways, which is an environmental justice issue. Another demonstration plan would show how you can make an urban transit system more convenient and attractive to use, focusing on an 18-mile stretch of the LA Metro's Orange Line bus rapid transit corridor from Los Angeles to the San Fernando Valley. We want SCAG staff to exercise their ingenuity and to rethink everything from streets to storefronts in making neighborhoods that immediately surround the route's 18 stations more transit friendly, more transit attractive, so that we can boost ridership in that corridor. The third project will be a kind of starter kit for cities or subregions within SCAG that have little or no sustainability guidelines or policies in their community planning. Western Riverside County is serving as the model for crafting these concepts and developing the metrics. In other words, trying to figure out what sustainability actually means to you and to your community. In addition to these demonstration projects, we've been working diligently with the state's Strategic Growth Council to provide SCAG and its member cities and counties with resources and tools that they need to put sustainability into action. Now, admittedly, this money is flowing to the MPO as opposed to directly to cities, but we think when it comes to the initial stages of planning, that is an appropriate way to do it, and they in turn are contracting out or working with local jurisdictions to develop these projects. Just this month, the Strategic Growth Council announced the availability of approximately $16 million for round 2 of its planning grants to promote sustainable local and regional planning practices. This is the second round of funding from Prop 84, and it comes in the form of grants or loans to support the planning and development of sustainable communities. Some of the projects that have been previously awarded include helping the city of Santa Monica transform some industrial land near the new Exposition Light Rail Station into a transit-oriented mixed-use development. The council also gave the city of Southgate money it requested to incorporate principles of sustainability and health into its general plan. Additional money went to develop a plan to turn a network of trash-filled, crime-ridden alleys in South Los Angeles into well-lighted and landscaped walkways. And there's a number of other examples of this as well in cities throughout the SCAG region, and also in the Western Riverside Council of Governments. There's other sources, of course, for funding here, including the Federal Partnership for Sustainable Communities, and we are trying to mix and match with those funds as well, but they are very limited and they are definitely under attack. Now, what is the relevance of all of this to people who are working in the university, either on research or training to go out and actually help develop these kinds of plans? Well, I think the first and most important thing that we need are valid, accurate models that are capable of forecasting the effects of different transportation and land use policies on future greenhouse gas emissions. What we've found is that several of the current models were never designed to measure the policy possibilities that SB 375 presents. They simply never thought about it at the time. A 2009 survey by the Regional Targets Advisory Committee that ARB created found that none of the 18 metropolitan regions had a model which was even reasonably sensitive to all the policies or factors which an MPO might choose to pursue. Only SCAG and SANDAG had improvements planned or under development in their models. The models today have been improved some, but they still have quite a way to go in order to bring more certainty and confidence to the growth scenarios and to enable communities to participate in the planning process. We also need in addition, we need research on the effectiveness of land use and transportation strategies, which could help improve the model's input to forecast future effects. We need more certainty in forecasting. We don't want to just be guessing about what might happen. Excuse me, regional and local governments need clearinghouses of information on which local climate actions have worked and which ones haven't. And we also need you, that is the research community, to tell us how we're doing and to help us measure our progress under SB 375. So we need help to figure out whether the MPOs really are demonstrating adequately that their plans will allow the region to achieve the goals for 2020 and 2035, and what are the key pieces of infrastructure that must be built, that must be funded in order to meet those targets, and what do we do if they're not? What's our plan B or C, or how do we get together to make sure that we don't have to go to plan B or C? This kind of research will help the Air Board to critically evaluate the sustainability plans, and it will help us as policymakers to determine the success of individual strategies, regional greenhouse gas target performance, and the overall statewide success of SB 375. This bill got tremendous publicity when it passed. It was something new. It had never been done before, and it was a huge milestone for California, which hadn't passed any kind of statewide planning law in more than a decade. But now, how are we going to find out whether it actually accomplished any of the things that we hoped for? Well, I think that we are moving in the direction of a new conversation about planning, and I am optimistic. I mean, I guess I'm congenitally optimistic, but I actually have seen signs that ingenuity and intelligence are being applied to these questions, and that people are looking at SB 375 as a tool that they can use to try to shift the focus on just moving more vehicles from place to place, or on cul-de-sacs and strip malls, to an approach that values sustainability and community. Those are, of course, buzzwords unless we actually make them real, but that's part of all of our job, is to try to figure out how to make it real. In the meantime, there's enough research to be done, I think, to go around and to keep everyone busy and help lots of people get PhDs in urban planning for the foreseeable future. We certainly hope so, because we need more. We need more fresh eyes, and we need more energy coming into this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, in particular, not feeling well and making it anyway. We have invited two of our colleagues to do some comments based on Mary's presentation. So they're going to be up next. And then after that, we're going to have audience Q&A for a while. So I'm going to proceed. I think Dan, would you like to begin? Dan Basmanian,
Sure.
professor in SPPD.
Well, Mary, as always, you've done a wonderful job of laying out, as you mentioned, an optimistic path forward, and I actually believe in it myself, or I wouldn't be here, and I suspect all of us in the room are hopeful about it. And so thank you for setting the tone and the direction. But can I ask you a question relative to the university?
Sure.
Which really has to do with, we're a policy school, and our students and our faculty are actually trying to answer some of the questions you raised at the end about needs. But your comments about us moving forward lead me to just ask you to reflect on, as you've looked back over the last several years, what have been the kind of critical interventions or triggers or stimulus in bringing about this serious focus on sustainable cities? You actually mentioned, Hassan said, planning changes the context of the conversation. I suspect that's important. You also mentioned SB 375, and we do have an indicator there, a measurable vehicle miles traveled. We're not measuring greenhouse gases, however, which is where this all began. That doesn't make it a bad process, but it's different. But just thinking about it, from your vantage points, if you've seen this, what have been some turning points? I call them triggers or policy stimulus or stimuli that we can look for so that we can help generalize.
Sure. Well, I do believe in the sort of critical mass theory of how policy moves forward, and I believe we got to a point maybe in the last couple of years where maybe even because of the wretched economy, people who had ideas about how development ought to go and where it should go were emboldened to step forward and make certain proposals that they might not have felt that they could have done before. I think that there's been funding, always an important factor, that has flowed into some of these questions, not maybe as much as one would hope, but still there have been some sort of visionary thinkers who've been able to put out papers and suggestions about how to do the measurements that we need to do, which has been also very helpful. And it's hard to really measure the extent to which the same forces that are making many members of the public just sort of generally distrustful of government are actually helping to spur people in the planning departments to think that they have some solutions which are not just good in an objective, measurable way, but also will actually engage citizens in the planning for their communities, especially when you bring in the housing and transportation and land use pieces along with the greenhouse gases. I don't flatter myself that greenhouse gases alone would be enough to do it. But I think when you show people that these other issues are going to be affected and that they have a chance to participate in developing a strategy that can map out what their community is going to be like in the next 5, 10, 15 years, people are willing to get involved.
I think the principles are well articulated. I'm just reacting myself, thinking, so there's a silver lining to this recession,
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly.
I don't want to go down that path, but I appreciate that. Maybe we'll turn over to Con and go back and forth.
Sure.
Con.
Okay, thank you. When Hilda asked me to come up with a few questions and be part of this discussion, she said she thought it'd be good to have the perspective of the industry or business community. And I reminded her that I had spent 30 years in the public sector, and I'm not sure I'm the most effective person speaking from that perspective. But let me at least explain. For the last 5 years, I've been with a firm called CityView, which finances infill development, and with a particular interest in transit-oriented development. And so we as a company are fertile soil for wanting to make money on projects that are part of the kind of strategy that Mary was talking about. But that leads me to ask a question partly based on our own experience, which is that you were talking about the valid models for measuring the impacts and seeing the success. As a corollary to that, it seems that the broader public would really benefit from having measures that they understand and can get behind. And just to give the example, I say from our own experience, is that we just financed and finished completion of a building right up the street at 27th and Figueroa, which is a student housing project. And we did not set out from the beginning saying we're going to make this LEED certified, but through a series of choices, not only was it LEED certified, but it's actually we got the final paperwork this week saying that it was a platinum LEED certified building. And what I found is among some of our fellow our investors and our staff who didn't know anything about what points, how you get the points, or the policy that was motivating all this, they loved the idea of, well, they knew platinum was better than gold, and gold was better than silver, and it reminded me of a little bit of what you were saying about the electric cars. How do you move it from kind of the people in this room to an understanding that, gee, we can do this, and there are understandable measures of, this is good, this is better, this is not good. Maybe you could talk about those kinds of measures.
Well, I don't have a lot of evidence to go on, but I have had a few conversations with major developers who are engaged in particularly the housing development area, and they're just in horrible shape at the moment. I mean, their business could not be worse, but they seem to be quite committed to continuing to invest in things that will make their buildings more sustainable, more energy efficient, and so forth. And I think they'll be more water use efficient. And I think that they really believe that that makes them more sellable, more initially valuable and more valuable later. I don't have a lot of evidence to go on. It would be nice if we did, but clearly some of the more thoughtful and, well-heeled firms out there at least have decided that through this period they're gonna stick to that path, and that it will enable them to come out ahead when people finally are in a position to start buying new homes again. I think the price of energy, although it's been very volatile and maybe isn't the most at the forefront of people's minds at the beginning of purchasing a building, even a commercial building, there are better tools out there now to estimate the lifetime costs of some of these things, and I think a lot of, should I say, fear or belief that the prices are going to go up, that energy costs are going to go up, whether it's because of climate or fuel costs or other environmental constraints or whatever. And so being able to have a building which is more energy efficient to begin with is definitely something that people think will make it a more valuable building.
Part of why I brought it up is I think something that could be added to the role of academia is to figure out measures that were broadly understandable.
That's a really good
and
point.
as
Yeah.
I say, for a broad audience, dumbing it down.
Right.
Platinum is better than gold, gold is better than
Yeah,
silver.
no, you're absolutely right.
It sometimes can be effective.
Right.
So.
Would you like a turn?
Well, I just want to follow up on another point that Mary raised, although it's not my area. Jen may want to chime in on this also. It really has to do with the transportation dimension of this sustainable city.
Right.
And it has to do with the electric vehicle dimension of that sustainability strategy. And I mentioned the electric vehicle as opposed to public transit, at least
Right.
at this point, 2011, because I always poll my students on how many of them would prefer public transit, and I realize a selective audience comes into a class on sustainability. There is a self-selection, but they all prefer public transit. And then I ask how many use it, and how many could be here this evening in our class if they relied on public transit, and I'm down to one or two. So there's a question here about, should we be pursuing doggedly as a state EVs? Or should we really somehow think that that's important, but we really ought to be putting our energy and our money and our political credits into
Yeah.
public transit?
It's
And what's the trade-off?
It's a really good question. I don't think we can afford, at this point in our history, to rule out any promising option that has co-benefits for health or for environment or energy. So I don't think, I'd like to resist having it be a trade-off. But one of the reasons why I think we may not have to do it is that the kinds of interventions from the public side that we increasingly understand are what's needed to make the electric vehicle market a success are not things that require a large public investment. I mean, somewhere on the list of things that the auto companies want is a direct rebate on the purchase of a new electric vehicle. There's no question that they would like to have that. But they will all say that it's more important to them to have government working to help make it easier for people to find charging, to be helping to develop the standards that will get the utilities and the building departments to work together so that if somebody comes in and they say they want an EV, they're told, you know, we could have your charging station in on Wednesday, not it will take 3 weeks, which is pretty much where things were just a year or so ago. So I think there's a lot that can be done there to make California and LA EV friendly without having to invest a lot of public money. On the other side, of course, transit requires very large amounts of public money, which is one of the reasons why we've had a hard time getting it, you know, over the years, especially when we had to retrofit it on top of our existing urban fabric. But it does seem as though, at least in some areas, if we can tie it together with development patterns that support it, that it really does make sense to, you know, to invest in that kind of thing. And then, you know, bike lanes and walkable communities and all those other things have to be part of a mixed strategy as well.
Let me bring up something that was painful last night when I watched the presidential debates. It seems whatever the question was, the answer was, get rid of the regulations.
Yeah, right.
And I thought to myself, well, gee, if we got rid of food inspection, we'd probably have cheaper food. If we got rid of building and safety codes, building would be cheaper. So, you know, I don't know where one stops, but it reminds me that this era, the word regulation terrifies many, many people and entities. And I wondered if you could discuss how, because you've had a long career dealing with this, what are the factors that can be done to make the regulations either cost-effective or prove their efficacy in terms of, you know, that they really produce results. Because if the answer of 375 and the MPOs and the whole process is, so we're going to require you to do this and require you to do that, I think it's like pushing a rock up a hill, and we have to, in effect, be smarter.
Well, I agree. You know, most of the kinds of regulation that I've been involved with over the years have actually been emissions standards. They've been targets that were set based on a performance standard that was intended to show how manufacturers of engines or boats or trucks or whatever could achieve reductions in the amount of pollutants that they were putting out. And those kinds of standards have to be based on good information about what's conceivable, what technology might be able to do. But we're almost always wrong, and this has been shown time and time again, with those kinds of standards where you're dealing directly with industry. They overestimate the cost, and so do we, even when we cut, down on their estimates. And we find that once the standard is set, it turns out to be achievable and unachievable at a lower cost than we thought. Now, that implies that you know what it is you're trying to achieve and that you have a good reason for getting there. That's certainly not true of every kind of regulation. And, when we get involved in other kinds of regulatory efforts, you can see how whenever you try to get too prescriptive about exactly how people are supposed to go about doing something, you always end up at least on the edge of really making big mistakes. But I have to say that despite the apparent belief on the part of the Republicans, at least in the primary, that attacking environmental regulations and EPA is going to be good for them politically, there is nothing in the polling, nothing that I have seen that indicates that this is a winning issue for them, even with Republicans, even with the over 50-year-old white male Republicans who live in suburbia. You know, it just, nobody actually believes that our environmental regulations are too strict. They might wish that we would slow down a little bit in terms of pushing new regulations, or, you know, they might be more interested in focusing on something else right now, like jobs, but there's not a widespread demand to just overturn the existing regs.
Well, and I think one of the things you brought up is even just the word standards is more acceptable to people than the term regulations. And maybe if there was more effort made to demonstrate the results of good standards,
Right.
it would help support the broader applicability. And I will say, speaking as a firm that invests, we actually like it when the standards are set broadly across a landscape, because it levels the playing field.
Right.
And you don't, play one jurisdiction off against with another. And I think that's why some of the state standards have been particularly effective, because you don't get, with 88 municipalities in LA County, there can always be someone that's a free fire zone for any standards.
That's true.
Okay, this is good. I know you all came to do something other than just sit here for 2 hours, and so it's your turn now. I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions to Mary or to any of the others on the panel. Yes?
Some very interesting points raised there, and I think.
You may wish to state your name.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Talk
Mark
loud enough so that people can hear you.
Yep, Mark Musgrave from Cisco, and I'm interested in just some of the debate between electric vehicles and the public transit systems, and clearly, investing at a state level in the charging points is going to be a critical piece. I actually remember going to a ski resort in Switzerland 20 years ago and seeing a electric vehicle parking, charging point up there, which I thought was amazing at the time. But just thinking about one of the things that we've seen in Silicon Valley recently that struck me, and if I change my habits because of one thing, then maybe there's a potential for other people, even though perhaps we're all preaching to the converted in this environment. But we just introduced 4G wireless technologies in the light rail transit system in Silicon Valley, and I think that's a massive move forward for people, particularly combined with tablet devices, for people to change the sort of way that they think about public transit, whether they could be productive whilst doing it. It certainly makes me more comfortable doing 45 minutes on a light rail if I know that I basically am doing what I would be doing in the office by doing that. So my question is that really the impact of technology been evaluated in terms of some of these planning decisions about what would actually move people into using these transit systems that we've spent so much money on?
Shall I
No one
answer
from
that?
America.
I know this is terrible because I'm the moderator, but I'm also the transportation person. And the answer is yes. What you're describing actually is what we would call a reduction in the sort of negative value of your time spent traveling. So you're actually able to make your time more productive, and therefore to you, the burden of traveling gets reduced and you're more willing to do it. So yes, that's actually been demonstrated in many places, and that's one reason that long-distance commuters often are rail commuter advocates, because they can get work done. Yes?
Good afternoon, everyone. Omar Mugadab, City of Los Angeles. One of the biggest challenges of the metropolitan cities and even rural areas is the management of waste in general. Is one of those things that is out of sight, out of mind. The people don't see it, and it has a major, I would say, component related to the transportation of those waste, which I would rather to call a resource as a resource rather than waste. But nevertheless, with the with the population growth in the major cities and the shortage of, or I would say, open space for landfills, what are your thoughts about making those resources, waste as a resource, and bringing it closer to the urban areas for waste to energy and the value of that in different forms, including energy itself, and rather than transporting it to faraway distances or railing it out?
Well, certainly the distance that things have to be transported to dispose of them is one of the major cost and greenhouse gas factors. But interestingly, when we were being lobbied by the 3 current waste-to-energy electricity plants to exclude them from the requirements of the cap-and-trade program, they felt that they should not have to buy allowances and be part of the effort to reduce overall greenhouse gases. They made the argument, they asserted that putting municipal solid waste in landfills would have a net worse effect on the environment because of the methane that's emitted into the atmosphere from landfills. So we actually commissioned a study on this issue. It's been criticized, but I don't think it's been demolished, which showed pretty convincingly that in California, at least, because we have such strict controls on off-gassing of landfills, and we don't allow for flaring, et cetera, that actually putting the same volume of trash in an existing landfill is better from a greenhouse gas perspective than burning it in a municipal waste incinerator and waste-to-energy facility. Now, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be newer technologies that would be better, but it's worth paying attention to the fact that one of the things that thinking about climate really forces us to do is to get better numbers on life cycle emissions of all the things that we try to do, of which waste disposal is definitely a classic. At the state level, we're looking a lot at ways in which we could recapture the methane that comes from agricultural waste and forest wastes that are currently just sitting around doing nothing except turning into methane gas. They're a big contributor to the state's greenhouse gas emissions profile, but the cost of gathering those wastes and getting them somewhere where they can then be used either to make a liquid fuel or to generate electricity has just been really a knotty problem. And so the governor has actually convened a bioenergy working group of all the agencies, including mine, that have a piece in this to try to get us to come up with some kind of a coherent plan. We're not setting any numerical targets yet. We're just trying to figure out what we could do that would make the most sense. And I think it's a very promising area.
Next question. Yes, Paul.
Hi, Professor Giuliano. I'm Paul Casey, once upon a time Professor Giuliano's student. My question is about the supposed relationship between LEED, which you were discussing, and sustainability. And the example I would like you to comment on is a major civic project by a city very near here. It got a very high, I don't remember whether it was platinum or gold or whatever, it got a very high LEED certification. It had solar panels. They ground up old glass and made decorative panels. They had some old rubber tires that they used, I don't know, some other building material. And it got this fabulous LEED award. And it was on the front page of the city publication. It was a parking structure for an additional 900 spaces in a very transit-rich area.
I'll take a chance at that one without speaking of the example. But when I brought up the question about measures, I did mean it in kind of a critical way. I had myself never known how you add up LEED points. And so since we had to actually pay a lot of money to put together an application, it was instructive to see how many points you get for this and how many points you get for something else. And each one of those factors could be changed. I mean, the Green Building Council, who I believe are, very well intended, but they could change the point system a little bit one way, change it a little bit another way. And I think what that means is that there's a bigger picture, and I think that's what you're raising, is here, I'm sure, obviously, that project won on that point system, but maybe looking in a broader measurement, it didn't deserve that kind of recognition. But what it still begs the question is, how does the broader public assess what's good and what's not so good or what's bad? And until, you have to give them credit, whether the point system is right or wrong. The number of people who now understand what LEED means, and as I say, understand that platinum's better than gold, that's worth something, and it popularizes a measuring scale. So I guess what I would say in response to your comment is maybe we need a measuring scale for the broader question you're raising about, maybe it's, there ought to be a measurement of how many trips in a certain geographic area or by car versus transit, or something that can be frankly dumbed down to people can say, oh yeah, that's a measuring system and I understand it, and gee, this particular building or project or city is high on that measurement.
Now we have enthusiasm. Over here.
Well, first, Mary, thank you for coming, and thank you for your tremendous accomplishments to date and all the things that CARB is doing as we move forward. So I'm going to ask you to look in the crystal ball a little bit. Gene Rodriguez, SCE, ACEEE, CEE, a whole host of other things. If we want to take GHG emissions reduction and get the results that we absolutely need, we have to move it from beyond the realm of the virtuous few, states like California, to making it commonplace, business as usual. So schools like USC do a wonderful job of training passionate, intelligent talent and exporting them across the country. How are we going to export California's leadership positions and political will to pursue GHG emissions when so many other places are quite frankly seeming to backtrack a little bit, and again watching the same political soap opera that we all see on television? There seems to be a sport anymore in this country at attacking regulation as opposed to looking at it as an appropriate way to make a big difference in the world.
Well, first of all, we are going to get through this election season, I promise you. That will happen. And that will help, because then maybe we can get back to talking about real things. Secondly, I think it's, although, I am in charge of the state's Global Warming Solutions Act, and I work for a governor who is very proud of being able to say the word climate change, you don't have to actually believe in climate change or have that as your primary motivation to want to work on a lot of the things that we're talking about here. The sustainable cities movement certainly wasn't invented in California, and some of the leadership on this issue, at least that I'm aware of from back in the days when I was at EPA, was coming off of the East Coast and places like Maryland, for example, where they were interested in dealing with growth and sprawl because of its pressure on finance and the cost of serving these communities, as well as pressure on the natural landscape. So I think this is one of those situations where there are many reasons to come to the same set of solutions, and it does sort of depend just on where you are at a given point in time, which of them are worth talking about. Again, I have had a number of conversations with very conservative security hawks who really are distressed that the federal government, including Republicans and Democrats, is not taking the issue of our petroleum dependency seriously and just not facing up to what it might take to actually do something about that. And, one of the things about the sustainability measures that we're talking about here is that they don't happen overnight. They don't visibly change things, tomorrow in the way that, banning internal combustion engines might do if we were going to do something like that, which we're not. But I assure you,
For the record.
just
Yeah, for the
right. But the thing is that we keep ducking these kind of long-term solutions because they're harder and because you can't show that they give you instant results. But if your time horizon is not 2020, but 2050, which I think it needs to be from a global warming perspective at least, that really frees you up to think about a lot of these things, which not only individually, but taken together and done in groups of policies, really could make a big difference. So that's what I pin my hopes on primarily, that and the belief that, the idiots really can't be in control forever.
Okay, the gentleman in the gray jacket.
Nick Flacken, I'm a SPPD instructor. I also have a petroleum question, and it relates to costs. We know most people accept peak oil and peak gas as a reality, which says costs will be going up. Common sense says, well, that's great. Behaviors will change, public policy will change. But so far, the data says it isn't happening. That despite the costs, the limited supply, usage continues to go up. Automobile usage continues to go up globally. So do you have thoughts of when this change in behavior and policy might happen?
Well, from my perspective, I don't think that gasoline is going to disappear anytime soon. I think the oil companies have gotten very adept at finding it in more difficult places, and that they will be able to bring it to market, and that combined with the ingenuity of the auto companies will mean that, we will have vehicles that essentially look like today's vehicles and run on today's fuels, but get 75 miles to the gallon within a very short period of time. I mean, I'm really talking about a relatively small number of years, given the new materials that are available to make those vehicles more lightweight. So relying on the notion of peak oil to, force everybody into better alternatives doesn't appear to be a winning strategy. It seems instead that what we have to do is to try to start looking at, the new proposals that come along, whether it's the Keystone XL pipeline or other, fracking proposals or whatever, and stack them up with the other things that we're talking about and try to have a fair, cost benefit comparison with some of these technologies. And I think it will turn out that it's going to take a long time before we really get rid of the last of the conventional internal combustion engine. But, we also don't have to agree to let oil companies do absolutely anything they might like to do to extract more hydrocarbons, from the earth. The thing is, though, that, people are willing to pay, at least up until now, but they're not willing to pay as much as it turns out because, it's true that the economy has people driving less, but there's reason to think that that people will not go back to driving as much as they were before the economy crashed, and so that's why we're having this big debate now about what to do about the Highway Trust Fund. Where are we going to get the money to pay for roads and other infrastructure? Because it's not probably going to, we probably won't be, having that sort of continued growth in gasoline. Of course, one thing we could do is just index it to the price instead of having it be a flat amount, which has been the case for whatever it is, 20, 30 years with the gas tax. But anyway, I think the answer to your question is that we need to sort of take a more holistic view of what we're trying to accomplish with these policies about vehicles and fuels, and certainly giving ourselves alternatives to imported petroleum is a very good motivation for the United States from a security perspective. But I don't think it's going to be enough to, get us to shut down production of the Ford F-150.
Now, this is the last question. So you've had your hand up for a long time, person in the white shirt. So you get the last question.
With Ancaris. Mary, you made mention the cap sectors, and they've got GHG reduction targets, some percentage of which can be achieved by going to other sectors. It seems to me that transit is an ideal sector to open up a reliable revenue stream so that we can actually increase service and have the funding for improved operations and maintenance. You see a possibility for that?
I think it's a really great idea, and I think there is a potential that we might be able to figure out how to do it. It's a sort of it's a conundrum in terms of what you would call an offset in this area. Is it something that's measurable? Is it something real? And most of all, is it something that would have happened anyway? That's always the problem with these sort of political or civic kinds of projects. We haven't had, we've had an approved urban tree planting protocol that would allow any urban area to bank greenhouse gas credits for planting trees in certain areas and according to certain rules that make sure that the trees stay alive and are well cared for and all that. We have not had a single project come in to use that protocol, not one, because the people who right now think they're going to be needing offset credits just aren't interested in getting involved in something that seems that iffy, I guess. So it would take a really interesting partnership, I think, between the cities and the people who are going to need credits, which would presumably be primarily oil companies in this instance, to figure out how to make something like that work. But I don't think it's impossible.
Okay, I'm going to say we thank Mary and the panel for a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. Worth the price of admission, right? We're going to go to the next phase of our program, which is a presentation by Hilda Blanco on what is going on at the Center for Sustainable Cities Research. And then after that, I'm going to wrap up with a few words, and then you all get rewarded because we get the reception. And then there really will be wine on some table. I don't know which one, but there will be at least, it'll be somewhere. So with that, I'm going to bring Hilda up for her presentation. Thank you.
All right. I want to welcome all of you and thank Mary, Chairwoman. Today, what I'm going to do is give you a sense of the research that we have been conducting at the center. All right, so I'm going to first make some introductory comments, give profiles, very brief profiles of several of our research projects, talk a little bit about our pending projects very briefly, and then about our future projects, our Summer Fellows program. Well, to begin with, since we have sustainability in the title, I don't think I can avoid saying something about sustainability. It is a nebulous concept, but there are some core meanings to sustainability. The UN definition that talks about retaining opportunities for present generations, especially the poor, and for future generations, is something that most of us agree with. And also there is the more popular definition that basically policies should be balanced between the 3 E's: environment, equity, and economics. And of course, there is a business version to this, the triple bottom line, and they use the 3 P's, right? So it's people, profit, and planet, and so on. And so, although it is a nebulous concept, and in a real sense, the center is committed to basically measuring sustainability, nevertheless, we do have some common agreement about what it means. We are very much focused on urban sustainability. We think it's crucial because the world's population has already reached the milestone that half of us now live in urban areas. And certainly in Asia as well as in Africa, there will be tremendously rapid urbanization in the next few decades as well. And it is really in the urban context that we will be confronting the challenges of our time. And these are challenges, of course, of climate change and growing population, but also demands for social justice and for more responsible governance. And finally, for just economies. Our research is interdisciplinary, and we reach out, and I'm very happy to see a number of our collaborators here today. We reach out across the campus. Our research is national and international in scope, and you will get a little sense of that later on in the presentation. But we do have a special emphasis on the Los Angeles metropolitan area. We're very much focused on sound policy and strategies for achieving more sustainable communities. We stress that strategies and policies should be evidence-based. That is, we'd like to see them work. And our research is very much focused on planning, policy analysis, and evaluation. And so the first part of my presentation will focus on current research, and I will highlight 3 current projects. The first one that I'm leading on water scarcity strategies in Southern California. Then the second is a project that some of my colleagues have been focused on, and then the last one on measuring urban sustainability. First, I'm going to focus a lot of the remaining presentation on this project, where we're looking at the strategies for addressing water scarcity in Southern California. And we're focused on these research questions. Can plant conservation and water supply strategies of these local and regional water districts provide reliable water supply for the metropolitan area? And in particular, can they cope with climate change? How cost-effective are the strategies? And so we are using case study methods. We're focusing on several water districts: the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Inland Empire Utility Agency, as well as the Orange County water districts. We're doing capacity and cost-effectiveness analysis, as well as a climate change scenario exercise, and then, of course, also policy analysis. So let me set the context for this. By the way, this was funded by the Haynes Foundation. And since you're all Californians here, you probably are very much aware of Southern California's reliance on water transfers from the north. And it really varies by water districts, and it could be up to 50% to 30%. And key to the transfer of water from the north is the San Joaquin River Delta. And this is a precious resource of the state that is vulnerable to aging levees, to land subsidence, to saltwater intrusion, and to pumping restrictions to protect endangered fish. It receives, the San Joaquin River Delta receives much of its water from the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains, which is the source of, the major source of the state's water storage. And it's already decreasing, as you're probably very aware. The state, of course, has a very substantive plan for water conservation. And since the early 90s, the state has initiated a voluntary urban conservation program, which is managed by the California Urban Water Conservation Council. And it promotes the implementation of these best managing practices to achieve more efficient water use. In 2009, state agencies developed a water conservation plan, which was finalized in 2010. This is called the 20 by 2020 plan. And so the idea is that we should be reducing our water use by 20% by 2020. So in just 8 years, we need to make these reductions. And in 2009, you may be aware that the legislature passed a comprehensive water package that that was accompanied by an $11 billion bond issue, which we will see again on the ballot in 2012. And this is extremely important because those funds will fix the delta, hopefully, and will make sure that we in the South have reliable water supplies. But it also will provide funds for water conservation and so on. And the bill mandated a 20% reduction in water use as well. I want to highlight now the effect of climate change on our water supply. We know that the snowpack has been decreasing, and this is projected to be very significant by mid-century. The projections from the state's climate adaptation strategy is that the decrease may be in the order of from 25 to 40%, and by the end of the century, by 60 to 80%. And this would mean that by the end of the century, about 1/4 of all stored water supplies in the state may not be available for us. And then, of course, climate change also means that there may very well be precipitation decreases, and this could be in the order of from 12 to 35%, which will, of course, affect surface water volumes as well as groundwater recharge. And drought cycles may also be affected. Okay, I want to explain to you a little bit about how this 20 by 2020 plan works. Basically, the states set conservation targets for each of these hydrologic areas, these regions. And we are in region number 4. Well, let's see what I can do this. Right here. And for region 4, the estimated per capita use between 1995 and 2005 was about 180 gallons per capita. And this, the target for our region has been set by the state to 154 gallons per capita per day. So basically, we have to reduce our consumption here by 36 gallons per capita per day. This slide gives you a sense of where our water comes from in this region. And as you can see, there's small buttons. But the larger share, the 45%, is groundwater, our own sources of water in this region. The 19% comes from the State Water Project from the north, right? Sierra Nevada. The 17% is Colorado River Aqueduct, and there is a 5% there that is the LA Aqueduct, and so on. So as you can see, we have various sources of water, and so we need to worry about climate change effects, both from the perspective of our transfers, of water transfers, as well as from our own groundwater sources. Okay. Here we've got the list of the 14 best management practices. And this is rather important. These range from water survey programs, educational programs, to more infrastructure type of programs such as residential plumbing retrofits, large landscape conservation programs and incentives, high efficiency closed washing machines, public information programs, as well as conservation pricing, so on. All right. Now, this is rather important because the way that the state set up these targets for each of the hydrologic regions are based on what they believe the capacity of the different districts and so on is to reduce water according to these best management practices. So what you have here is a table that gives you the sense of how the state arrived at this 36 gallons per capita per day reduction that we need to comply with by 2020. So as you can see, codes may deliver a 6 gallon per day per capita reduction by 2020 and so on. Okay. Typically, of course, conservation measures reduce energy use by reducing the need to produce, to transport, and to purify water, and it's relatively inexpensive. And there have been estimates as to how effective, how cost-effective these water strategies, water conservation strategies are. And I give you a measure of that here. For example, Santa Monica's conservation plan, the LA Economic Development Corporation study of 2008 estimates that the 30-year cost per acre foot for this strategy would be about $210. And this is something that can be compared to what the Metropolitan Water District's price for transferred water was, which was close to $700 per acre foot, and so on. Okay, so we know that conservation measures are the low-hanging fruit, but how cost-effective are they relative to each other? There are 14 of them, as you may remember. And so what we have been looking at are the water districts. And we have been focusing within the Inland Empire Utility Agency on the Cucamonga Valley Water District. And we ran the model of the California Urban Conservation Water Council to determine how cost-effective or the benefit-cost ratio of these different strategies. And so here you have a chart that tells you the benefit-cost ratio of some of these best management practices. And I want to point your attention to, let's see what I can, to synthetic turf. Well, the first thing to notice about this chart is that they all have a positive benefit-cost ratio. They're all over 1, the magic number. But some of them are so much better than others, right? So synthetic turf comes very close to 1. But if you look at the one with the largest benefit-cost ratio, that is weather-based irrigation controllers, you can see that it's a terrific investment. And so one of the interests that we have is to be able to provide some policy guidance as to which ones, which strategies provide the biggest bang for the buck. Okay, but we have also run into some interesting dynamics as well, and I can only point out one of these today. Here we've got, we know that conservation strategies are the low-hanging fruit. The state is mandating conservation. But from the perspective of the water districts, conservation strategies, when they are successful, really introduce uncertainty into the water district's projections. And they have the potential to reduce their revenues and to affect their workforce. So On the other side, what I have is a quote from the Cucamonga Valley Water District's 2012 budget. It basically tells you that a reduction in water sales of nearly 10,000 acre-feet in 3 years has challenged their ability to accurately project future revenues. And in 2009, they instituted a workforce reduction for the first time in their history. And so, this is, especially coming from a policy school, this is a really important issue. It really shows us that we need to pay attention to the institutional impacts of our policies, because agencies are really agents. They're not cogs in the wheel, in a sense, and they will react to mandates and policies and so on. Okay, now I want to just briefly explain to you some of the research that two of my colleagues at the center have been focused on, Professors Rose and Professor Wei, who's here. And they have been focused on developing effective carbon reduction strategies. Primarily, their focus has been on state strategies, and we're very concerned, even though we are focused on urban sustainability, we have to be concerned with state and national policies because they set the framework for urban policy. And so their research question is focused on how a state's economy and greenhouse gas emissions profile can best develop an effective carbon reduction strategy. And so they have been providing an incredible service to states in developing their carbon reduction plans by basically refining and applying a nonlinear programming model that provides terrific policy advice as to what mix of either cap and trade or carbon tax or combinations would be best for each state. And they have been incredibly successful in this effort. As you can see, there are quite a number of states here, and of course California being one of these, but they have become experts throughout the country in this particular area. And now that they have pretty much captured the domestic market, they're beginning to develop great collaborations abroad. For example, Professor Wei is now collaborating with the Chinese Academy of Sciences to introduce stakeholder and analytic frameworks for developing climate action plans for Chinese provinces. They're also helping Mexican border states do impact analysis of climate actions. Okay. I just want to tell you a little bit about one of the projects that we've been involved in as well, funded by the Urban Institute. And here we're really focused on this issue of what evidence do we have for sustainability strategies. And we're, in this case, what we've been doing is surveying university urban sustainability centers around the country. And we have completed that aspect of the research, and now we're trying to move on to commission research reviews. And finally, we will convene an expert summit to identify policy and research agendas for urban sustainability. And we have found, for example, that university centers focused on this issue are not evenly distributed. They're primarily clustered in the West, in the Northeast, and the Midwest. That most of them are small, most budgets under $1 million a year. And also very important for us that the difficulty of funding topics is greatest with interdisciplinary research. And yet, this is really what sustainability is all about. It's not merely sustainable transportation or sustainable land use. It is the dynamics between all of these sectors and so on. And of course, we knew this going in, that transportation is the easiest type of project to fund under the rubric of sustainability. We did identify 195 recent research projects that these centers have focused on, and we categorized them into major themes and cross-cutting themes and so on. And this is just to give you a sense of the main themes that we have identified. As you can see, transportation and then built environment, and climate change, 12% and so on. And what the outcome of this research will be is the identification of mature enough areas for conducting research syntheses or research meta-analyses and so on. And we identified a number of these areas. For example, we think that areas relating to sustainable new construction and retrofitting are areas that we should invest in a research synthesis. Okay, so now let me just briefly note some of our pending research. And here we are very much focused on adaptation. That is, how do we plan to deal with the unavoidable impacts of climate change? And we have a proposal out to EPA. Hopefully they get to keep some of their money. We're very much focused on adapting to extreme climate change impacts, and we are continuing to work on water in this case. And this is with colleagues at the University of Washington. The second one we have developed, and with our Sea Grant colleagues here, who are here, and we proposed this to NOAA just recently. The Sea Grant researchers are taking the lead on this. And this is exciting because if we get funded, we will be able to begin to help the city of Los Angeles to plan how to adapt to sea level rise. And then the last one shows the fact that we also have a strong international research agenda here. It's a small grant that we proposed to NSF. And here we're trying to figure out how we can jumpstart a collaboration with a university in Ahmedabad, CEPT, that is focused on sustainable development. And then finally, I want to tell you a little bit about our Summer Research Fellows program. Basically, the program provides fellowships for graduate students. And the great thing is that the students not only get some money, but they also get to do supervised research on topics that we identify. It's terrific for the center because it provides a basis for grant proposals. And we've done a number of these over the last 2 years or so. And this is just a small selection. This summer, we focused on a comparison of climate change adaptation plans in the U.S. We began to figure out what are the problems that the cities ran into and so on. The second is on retrofitting strategies for multifamily buildings. We're very much interested in this, and I think there is a growing interest around the country to figure out which are the most cost-effective strategies, which work, and so on. We're very much interested in green sustainable rating systems, the topic that came up again. And also, we have very much focused on 375, and in particular, the methods and models that are being used to track progress on the state's targets. So in conclusion, thank you for being patient and waiting for wine and other refreshments. Urban sustainability is crucial due to increasing urbanization and the challenges of climate change. Yet, sustainability research in this area is still overall immature. And we at the Center for Sustainable Cities are beginning to contribute to make knowledge in this area more rigorous, productive, and applicable to urban regions. Thank you very much. And I think you're going to,
Yeah, I'm last up. Thank you, Hilda. That was great. For some reason, I always get the assignment of doing a wrap-up. No, it doesn't matter what the conference is. I always end up doing the wrap-up. And so that's my job here today. If I talk too long, you'll start to hear noise in the back as the food starts to come in for the reception. You heard some very interesting little vignettes of the kind of research that's going on at the Center for Sustainable Cities. You heard about some of the things we're learning about the realities of water conservation policies and planning and real live implementation issues. You heard about all the good work that's gone on in terms of using very fancy economic models to figure out what's the best strategy for reducing GHGs. And you got a little bit of flavor of some of the stuff that we're working on in terms of adaptation. I would like to go back to Mary's presentation and the panel presentation and just sort of go through some of the themes that I thought came through in that presentation. And maybe you'll agree and maybe you won't, but I think it's a good thing that will help us to have a nice discussion over our glass of water and wine. The first thing that I got from the presentations is that sustainability is far more than SB 375 or AB 32. According to Mary, there's a lot of other forces that have sort of come together that has created a sort of popular orientation and support for changing many of the ways in which we have done things for many decades. Some of that has to do with energy scarcity. Some of that has to do with other scarcities of other resources. There seems to be a general and growing concern about how our cities operate and are managed. And of course, that concern goes international as well, as we see very rapid growth rates in cities around the world. The second theme that I heard was that we need measures and metrics. We need them to know how we're doing. We need them to communicate concepts to the public, to decision makers, to investors, to builders, and so on. And we need them in order for us to learn something about what works and what doesn't. So measures came through very loud and clear. Another theme was we need to understand the problem and possible solutions. We need research on what works and what doesn't, and what that tells me is that we need to monitor and invest in evaluating the experiments that we actually conduct. I'm a great believer in learning from policy decisions so that we can make better policy decisions in the future. Also in terms of understanding solutions, you heard the ideas of life cycle. We need to be thinking about public policy, for example, in the transportation world, in terms of the overall life cycle impacts of different alternatives. We need to be able to better predict policy outcomes. This is something I hear all the time, in my world anyway. We're always looking for the better model. We're always looking for the model that predicts the future accurately. And I guess my question for all of you is, could you predict what the euro is going to do tomorrow? And if you can't do that, then we certainly can't predict what's going to happen. And moreover, most of the policies that are being discussed have very tiny impacts, okay? So incrementally, they may make a difference, but individually, they tend to have very tiny impacts. And so you're tasking the modeler to actually look for the proverbial needle in the haystack. And so now I'm opinionating, by the way. It seems to me that we actually have to think in a completely different way. And our questions are, if we did this today, how would it work out? Because we know what today looks like. And furthermore, what are the probable scenarios of the future? And then how do we devise strategies that are most likely to fit best for an array of probable futures? So there's a lot of work, I think, that needs to be done in sort of our entire modeling and planning approach. There's also, finally, there was just little bits and pieces of what I call market forces might help. There was a reference to rising energy prices and how that may change people's behavior. And not just rising energy prices, but the expectation of rising prices over time, which was given as a potential explanatory factor for people investing in energy efficient buildings, right? Because you need to get that back over a life cycle. There was also the issue of changing preferences. There was a talk about young people are doing things differently now. Some of my students are sitting here in the back of the room, and I put them through an exercise at the beginning of the semester where they have to actually record their own travel diary for a week. And then we take all the data and we put it all together, and I show them what their travel is really like. And it turns out that our environmentally sensitive students who always want to take transit and ride bikes cover just about as many VMT as anybody else. And so if there is changing preferences, right, that would definitely change the market. And then sort of for me, what I like the statement the best, or I think I'm interpreting Kahn's statement as sustainability sells. And so I think we all should think about all the ways in which sustainability sells. And but what I mean by that is that that's where we need to go, cost-effective solutions to problems that we see as actually being important and significant. So that's what I got out of the past 2 hours or so. And I see movement in terms of food in the back. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Please do stay and have some refreshments. And welcome to the new Center for Sustainable Cities. Thank you.